The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Cosmic Catastrophe on Revolution.radio. I'm your host, Diamond, from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, and joining us is my lovely partner and co-host, Leah Shaper.
Hello.
Welcome to the show. We got a great one. We seldom have bad shows here, so that's good news. We're going to kick off the show with an article that just came out, which is, I don't know how to put it, dumber than anything I've ever seen in science, but we'll get into that. It talks about a massive asteroid impacts, two of them that occurred in the Cenozoic, which is this geologic age. They are the top 7 impactors known on Earth. These are multiple mile-wide asteroids smashing into the planet, and the team concluded that they didn't affect the climate on Earth, which is absolutely insane.
While at the same time saying that it did affect the climate on Earth.
Yeah, we'll jump into that. The rest of the program, we're going to be discussing an enigma, the Bruniquel cave in France, where it appears that one of the oldest structures ever created exists, and it is a stone circle. Can you imagine that? But this stone circle isn't out in a field as an astronomical observatory. It is deep in a cave where it was completely pitch black. Not only that, it got sealed up, let's say 20, 30,000 years ago, and was completely left in pristine condition until some spelunkers found it back in the 90s. Yeah. Absolutely amazing.
Which is very cool. That's a really fortuitous thing.
And I don't think that what their conclusions are correct, and I have some evidence to suggest otherwise. You remember the 470,000-year-old structure?
The wooden structure you're talking about?
Yep. That wasn't built by Neanderthal.
Right.
And most things that we're finding that are that old have a different species associated with them than Neanderthal, whether it be Homo erectus or, in this case, with the wood structure, I think Homo heidelbergensis is what they think built that one.
Yeah, I don't remember. No.
I have the article, so we'll take a look at it. Anything else before we get started?
Nope.
All right. Tell me if you can see the screen.
I can.
So
I am
here
echoing a little bit.
Oh yeah, let me fix that. You are or I am?
You are. I am. So it's your speaker.
How is that better?
I think so. Yes, that's better.
So this is from physics.org. Massive asteroid impacts did not change Earth's climate in the long term, research finds. Now, the impact craters in question are the Chesapeake Bay impact crater, in case you were unaware of that. There's a huge structure near the Delmarva Peninsula that is an impactor from quite some time ago. Were you aware of the Chesapeake Bay impact?
Yes.
And this is one that I hadn't heard of, the Papagai impact structure in Siberia, which is just this remnant dark spot here, this ring structure. And both of these impactors smashed into Earth within very close proximity. So the two massive asteroids hit Earth 35.65 million years ago, but according to the team, did not lead to any lasting changes in Earth's climate. So that sentence alone needs to be reviewed, because what does lasting changes to Earth climate mean to these scientists to begin with?
Right. I mean, I'm still echoing now all of a sudden. They make a distinction between, they point out that they're taking samples that are 11,000 years apart, which is a pretty broad time scale. I mean, given how far back we're going, that's not really very surprising. And they're using the results of those samples that are 11,000 years apart, to conclude that there's no lasting Earth changes. And at the same time, they completely acknowledge that there could easily have been shorter term changes over tens or hundreds of years, which, depending on how you look at it, if you're a human being living on Earth, hundreds of years is a long time. So it's all relative. So it's such a dumb thing to say. And the fact that this is the title of the article about this study, that there were no long-term changes, is very misleading, the way they write this. Like, I'm trying to figure out what the motivation to writing the article this way is. Because what they actually say is they completely acknowledge that their study would not have picked up shorter term changes. However, our study would not have picked up shorter term changes over tens or hundreds of years, as the samples were every 11,000 years. Over a human timescale, these asteroid impacts would be a disaster. They would create a massive shock wave and tsunami. There would be widespread fires, and large amounts of dust would be sent into the air, blocking out sunlight. So what is your damn point? Why are you writing the article like this?
I don't get it. If we compare these impacts, let's just go over it. These are the fourth and fifth largest known asteroids craters to hit Earth, or however I said that was incorrect. These are the fourth and fifth largest asteroid craters on Earth. And so the Papagai crater is 60 miles wide, and the Chesapeake Bay structure 25 to 55 miles wide. Now, any single one of these, when they occur, is going to knock up so much material into the atmosphere, it would mimic a VEI 7 or 8 eruption.
Right.
And we know that those darken the skies, not for long periods of time, just for a few years.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe up to 10 years, the lasting effects. But after the event, things generally recover. So you have the event, it darkens the skies with all this material, then the material slowly comes back to Earth and gets reincorporated. There is no example of anything that I'm aware of in a geologic setting that would change the climate for hundreds of thousands of years. That's just stupid.
Well, right. And they're writing this article as if that's what is being claimed, which no one's claiming. So again, what's your point? Not
All
you.
right, there's no point of this whatsoever, but we will leave you links to the paper, No Paleoclimactic Anomalies Associated with the Late Eocene Extraterrestrial Impact Events. I have another issue with the paper. They're basing it all on benthic foraminifera.
Mm-hmm.
These are very small planktonic species that accumulate at abyssal levels. So deep in the ocean, when they die, they fall down and they accumulate at the bottom of the ocean. And benthic foraminifera contain O18 oxygen 13 isotopes that they can use as proxies to assume what's happening on the surface.
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't even really direct measurement of anything. They're using one proxy to say that they didn't find any long-term change.
Well, I'm a little confused now because the article, I didn't look at the study. The article that goes with the study says that they compare their study with other studies done at lower resolution. So looking at samples at greater intervals than 11,000 years, and their analysis was more limited. For instance, only looking at species of benthic foraminifera that lived on the seafloor. Now, they're saying that in their study that they looked at fossils that lived at different ocean depths.
Yeah, these foraminifera live at different levels. So,
okay.
Yeah, they live throughout at different
I see. They looked at multiple
the
species of benthic foraminifera. Okay.
Yeah, depending on the species, some of them live in the photosphere, some of them live in the dark area, some live in the abyssal area.
Right. I mean, it's hilarious because they're patting themselves on the back for using more than one species and then for using a higher resolution than some broad thing that's more than 11,000 years to come to some conclusion that is completely meaningless.
Right. And think about what benthic foraminifera are. It seems like a bunch of scary words. These are creatures that live really deep in the ocean, let's say several miles down. There is a layering in the ocean and there are currents. If the atmosphere up above gets hot, let's say, for 100 years, it will barely affect the surface temperature of the water. And 5 miles down, nothing is going to happen whatsoever.
Right, right. So you're also using a proxy that really isn't going to indicate anything to you.
What we do
I feel
know,
like,
geologically, here's the Epica data, is that the temperature changes all the time with regularity and huge swings. So if we were just to miss this swing here, this is, let's say, 8,000 years, that is beyond the resolution of the study. You would have missed the largest temperature change on Earth ever recorded.
Right. Right.
And it's even funnier. If we go look at the Holocene, had they missed this 600-year period, they wouldn't have seen an 18 degree rise in temperature on Earth from an ice age to an interstadial. They would have missed that.
Right. Well, and even if their resolution was higher, any indication of that would have been very limited for the reason that you just stated earlier, that these are really deep ocean creatures.
Right. And a cursory study of the largest impact that we know of, which is the Cretaceous Tertiary boundary here.
Yeah.
This is the Chicxulub. This is 65 miles wide, 75 miles wide. It's one of the biggest impact craters we know of. And look at the temperature graph geologically. Nothing significant happened on the geologic temperature graph. Nothing. Right. It's just a smooth transition across the boundary.
Right.
So temperatures do drop for catastrophic reasons.
Yes.
But based on Chicxulub and no climatic shift, impactors are short-lived. They're terrifying. They're completely destructive, and they can result in mass extinction like right here, yet they have no lasting climate effects because it all dissipates in a few decades. Mm-hmm. All of the forest fires get put out by rain. All of the dust in the atmosphere comes back down to the surface, and everything is fine again in just a few decades. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I feel like the whole purpose of this study and the article written about it is simply to minimize the idea of natural climactic change or climactic change induced by catastrophic consequences. I can't think of any other reason why you would write this like this.
Yeah, and that's pretty dumb because just here in the Holocene, all of these small blips down, these are all dark ages. And they're just small shifts in temperature which occur in a few decades. And they result in entire civilizations disappearing, like the Minoans and then the Romans. So the resolution can't even see all of these civilization-ending things happening one after another. It's just bad science and a bad paper, a waste of funding.
Completely.
And anyone could have done it at the kitchen table on a napkin, for goodness sakes.
Right. Yeah, no, it's pretty embarrassing. And I actually find it infuriating in a certain way. Like as you just rightly point out, a resolution of 11,000 years in the face of the fact that there would be many civilizations over the time period of 11,000 years. It's like you cannot suggest that these things don't matter. I mean, they acknowledge that they do, but yet their whole premise is like, see, nothing happens. It doesn't matter over the long scale. It really doesn't matter. Just to stop looking at that. It's so weird.
Just to refresh your memory, the last 3.64 million years have been the coldest in all of geologic history, except for a short blip in the Carboniferous and at the Ordovician-Silurian boundary. Those are the only two times we've been as cold as we are, but we are now in the longest stretch of ice age ever recorded on Earth. So even today, we are still in the Quaternary ice house. Mm-hmm. But we're burning up.
And it's, just looking at how much longer the ice house conditions are currently than in the past makes it funny, considering how we talk about our climate today. Not you and I, others.
All right. Let's talk about the fun topic.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about the oldest stone circle we know of, which is deep in the Bruniquel cave in southwest France. And then we may get to some other stone circles because there are literally thousands, if not tens of thousands, worldwide in every country and every latitude and every longitude, in every location, from high mountains to deserts to prairies to the ocean. Now, this is interesting. The odds of finding this cave are 0. And what it also means is that there are dozens or hundreds of other caves sealed with more information that we need to find.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happened by accident, a spelunking team found a small opening in some clay, and they explored it, and it opened up to a big cave. This is in the 90s. When they squeezed. I mean, I watched videos. Did you see any videos of entering this cave?
No, I didn't even look for any.
It's a small squeeze box, like 11 by 12 inches you have to go through for about 10 feet.
Yeah, I did. They kind of mentioned that narrow
And
opening.
then it opens up into these amazing, pristine caverns. No one has been in there for 40,000 years or so, and maybe longer, because the structure in there has been dated to 175,000 plus or minus 2,000 years old. And they did very high resolution thorium dating. So you can assume that this date is correct.
I thought it was uranium dating.
It's uranium thorium.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That allows you to go back 500,000 years. And this was the perfect time frame for this. The first dating they did was carbon dating, and the carbon dating went off the chart. So you can only go back about 50,000 years with carbon dating, and it exceeded that.
Right.
So they had to use a different technique. And then they come up with this ridiculous number. The first number was 176,005.
Mm-hmm.
And the stalactites that they were using, that they broke off, or the stalagmites, I'm sorry. Tites are from the ceiling, mites are from the floor. And this structure is exclusively stalagmites, which are the floor flowstone, which are the opposite of the tite. So the stalactite is the icicle from the ceiling, and then it drips down onto the floor and a column builds below, and that's the tite.
Mm-hmm.
So, and another side note, this was discovered in the 90s, and then the scientists that were studying it, the head scientist died in a cave in 1999, a different cave, but doing similar work. So
he died in a cave? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was leading another tour in a different cave.
How did he die?
He had a massive heart attack in the cave.
Oh, so it wasn't really related to being in the cave. He just
had a heart attack in the cave.
Oh, sounds like
this guy was
probably the best place for him to go.
Yeah. So all the research stopped in 99, and it wasn't until 2013 that Jacques Jeanbert, who is the lead author here, went back into the cave with a multidisciplinary team of scientists from all over the world to determine what was going on in this cave. In the cave, there are untouched, pristine cave barrows that are still there, as if they did it yesterday. Totally insane, this cave.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that I find very interesting too is they specifically note that there was like no disturbance. There's no evidence of disturbance by bears in the area where this stone circle was found. So it's as if for thousands of years after the construction of this thing that the bears were avoiding the area, maybe because it smelled like hominids.
Right. Yeah, that is a good point. I was wondering that too. How can a 175,000-year-old structure stay perfectly preserved when it was still accessible for at least 120,000 more years?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So apparently there's lots of caves to go into, and you don't need to screw with stuff inside the caves. These are the structures in question, 3D imaging. The main ring structure is about 21 feet across, or 7 meters. It has 2 inter areas. The backside here, which appears to be collapsed, and this was probably a much more intricate structure when it was originally built.
Mm-hmm.
This is a hearth. So there's evidence of fire in this region right here and in other areas in these structures. We also have this ring structure here, a smaller circle. And so there's 2 main rings with 2 central piles. Is that what we call those?
I guess, yeah. Because they
And
are
here's
stacked. The stalagmites are stacked on each other.
Yeah, sometimes they're stacked like you would stack firewood, and then here we could see them stacked on the side too.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of this may have shifted. And the reason I'm
Right.
saying that is there's things called earthquakes that happen, and over long periods of time, this may get shaken a little and start to collapse because it's very old.
Yeah.
And there was a period of it took a while there is now a crust over the top of all this of calcite,
Mm-hmm.
which is what they use to get the specific dating of this construction. So you dig a core sample through the crust and into the original stalagmites, and then you take dating above and below the boundary of the contact, and then you can get the youngest and the oldest it can be.
Mm-hmm.
And then they drilled into the tips of the stalactites that were used in the construction, which would show the very last moment it was actually forming, which is probably the same time as when it was built.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you move it away from the source of its formation, it stops growing, and it's that last layer that's the day they built this.
Right.
So they nailed the date on this.
Yeah. And they had very good agreement with their samples. So.
And so the first stone circle is underground in pitch black. Absolutely mind-boggling.
What is it? It's like 336 meters inside the cave. That's a long way. That's deep.
Almost a quarter mile.
That's crazy.
Now, they're claiming it's Neanderthal, and there's really good evidence that Neanderthal wasn't a caveman that went ooga booga.
Right.
But that's been the thinking for most of my life, is what everyone gets taught. The cavemen are going ooga booga and grabbing. This is what I remember as a kid. They're grabbing their wives from the out in the woods by the hair, and then they drag them back to the cave. Remember?
Right. Well, and it drives me crazy too that still today in, let's say, media, you'll see these stupid illustrations of these ooga booga cavemen who were like hunched over, and they always have like all this hair on their face, and they're always like carrying a club, and they're dressed in rags, and you're like, come on.
So in the last decade and recent years, in just the last few years, they've uncovered multiple lines of evidence that Neanderthal was quite advanced. Similar cave paintings that the natives here in the Southwest have been found, specifically hand structures, which are invisible here, but when they're using new techniques, they can uncover this very ancient rock art. In this case, this is Neanderthal hand stencil rock art dating 66,000 years old. There's also cave paintings by Neanderthal, and here you can see a head of a horse. And these are dated around 47,000. So clearly there are some Neanderthals that can draw a horse. Not all humans can draw a horse in profile like this.
Right. Right. It takes some practice and skill, right? So I mean, that's a very good point, right? Because the idea of doing anything that requires practice and skill obviously indicates higher intellectual function.
We'll take a quick look at the rock art here. I'll blow it up. This is pretty fascinating. What do you notice anything that's coming out right now that's a little weird? Just above the horse's head, there are a series of complex dots in two different patterns, one with 3 rows and maybe 100 dots or more.
I can't really see that.
You don't see where I'm right here?
I see where you're pointing, but it's not really evident from my perspective here.
Can you see them now?
Well, I just zoomed in and so do you. So, okay, now I can see it. Yeah.
Right. So there's some type of calendar, or how many visits here, or they're counting something. In my opinion, there's 2 sets of these dots, and there's more over here in a complex geometry. So there's something very intelligent going on here. This is just not like doodles from an idiot.
Yes.
And
go
ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, they've been calling Neanderthals dumb for years. They had evidence that Neanderthals wore jewelry in the form of these eagle talons with small drill holes in them. But they said that these holes were formed by a creature that ate into the bone. But that all came to an end when a huge cache of other amulets at a Neanderthal site were found, including amulets that were carved out of fossils, human teeth, other teeth, and talons. So they were wearing these as jewelry or something else. It was either spiritual, but it was definitely highly symbolic.
Earlier today I was looking at some material about stone circles in Japan, and they were looking at some particular artifacts that they found at stone circles, which were kind of like these little, almost like little tablets or amulets or something. And they were talking about the holes that were in the amulets, and they're like, "Oh, look, see," and this isn't even remotely nearly as ancient as this stuff is. And they're like, "Oh, look, this is an indication that they had a concept of numbers. And this is an indication that they had a concept of internal organs." And it's like, it's so insulting the way that they talk about the people of the past. Like, having a concept of numbers is not difficult. Just look out in nature. There are things that you can count easily. You can line them up, little stones, and count them. Or internal organs. Did they think that these people don't hunt? That they don't actually handle the internal organs of the animals that they kill and infer that they surely have the same things inside their body? It's so incredibly condescending. It's disgusting.
Well, how about this? This is a new discovery that just occurred this week. A 9-year-old boy found a 60,000-year-old hand axe that's Neanderthal.
Ugh.
This is highly complex stuff. In order to get a biface hand axe like this that is sharp, completely around, symmetrical, takes a lot of skill. There is less than 0.1% of the population of Earth can even create an arrowhead.
The picture on the right where he's holding it in his hand, you can kind of see how thin it is based on the way he's holding it. And that's seems very advanced as well.
Yeah, so just fascinating stuff. And you can even there is a place right here, Time Vault Gallery. They have hundreds of Neanderthal artifacts for sale.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a location called the Mousterian Neanderthal Stone Tool Site where there are thousands and they're just excavating them more and more and more. And here, obviously, there's tons of them. You can buy scrapers. We're talking 50, 60,000-year-old artifacts here for $300.
It's interesting too, because, we still have this tendency to look at lithic artifacts like this as creating an axe out of a piece of stone is far more efficient than having to make one out of steel,
Yeah, and we were talking about this yesterday about the Yuga cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So if we were to go back 12,000 years ago, we would be in the golden age.
Yes.
If we went back 36,000 years ago, we'd be in the golden age.
Mm-hmm.
If we went back to when this stone tool 60,000 years ago was being built, we would be in the golden age.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean we have big cities. It doesn't mean we have artificial intelligence. It means we have deep understanding of the universe, cosmology, how to make amazing hand tools like this, and create carvings like the cave lion.
Yes.
That's a 45,000-year-old artifact.
Yeah.
So
for
these
our listeners and
go ahead.
For our listeners and viewers, what Diamond was just referencing, and as far as what we were talking about yesterday, we did an awesome interview yesterday with Walter Cruttendam talking about the Yuga cycle and binary star systems, and consciousness evolution. And check it out; it is on Magnetic Reversal News.
Yeah, it was great. So, all right, so we proved that Neanderthal is pretty advanced. They wear jewelry, they paint, they do petroglyphs. And they got stone tools. They have all of the same stone tools as modern Native Americans had for butchering animals. And they're not the only smart ones. Several years ago, interlocking logs were found in a bog, perfectly preserved, dating back 480,000 years. And there's a notch in one log and another log laid upon it, just like we make log cabins today. And this is 500,000 years ago.
Absolutely amazing.
And there were other things found nearby that date 400,000 years ago, including a wedge, a digging stick, and another chopped log. So these people had been here for a while, and they associated the only known hominids in this area at the time as Homo heidelbergensis. So we now know Homo heidelbergensis is pretty advanced. We also have evidence that Homo erectus buried its dead, also painted and created jewelry. And now we've got Neanderthals doing the same. So all of the hominids going back 500,000 years are as smart as us.
Yes.
And capable of doing all the same things.
Yes.
Yeah, it was not Ooga Booga. All right, so they attribute these. So here is the paper, and here is the plan view of what those 3D structures are. They attribute this to Neanderthal for a number of reasons. It can't be Homo sapien because they didn't come into Europe until about 55,000 years ago. But Neanderthal were in this area at the time. But at the same time, we also have Homo erectus around at the same time. So it could be either of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
That's
even
all,
both, right?
Or both.
You know,
they're working together to do this.
Right. You know, we certainly have evidence of interbreeding between hominids, so they could easily have been working together.
And they might find something where they can take a look at the proteins. They might find human bone here to determine the species or something, a tooth. It's all covered in an inch or more of calcite. So the only way to find those artifacts would be to destroy the site.
Right.
Which is probably not going to happen, but there will be some type of LiDAR type technology, ground penetrating radar, where they could probably scan it. And then if they can find an artifact, they can only destroy that little tiny spot. You know what I mean? To get to it.
Yeah.
That may happen. And then that would simply seal the deal on us knowing who's responsible for one of the oldest constructions ever that we know of, dating 175,000 years ago, which ironically looks like Göbekli Tepe. This is almost identical to the layout of those oval structures with T-pillars on around, 2 T-pillars in the center. This has some significance that this wasn't an accident that it's laid out the same as Göbekli Tepe, in my opinion. This is something that is very lasting, cosmologically significant, and these guys are doing it deep in a cave to maybe preserve it so that another group can come through and they'll find it and they'll be like, wow, ooga booga.
Right. I had the same impression as far as its location, that potentially being a intentional means of preservation, right? In the same way that Göbekli Tepe was intentionally buried, you know?
They just went 1,000 feet underground and did it.
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting that this was sealed up maybe 40,000 years or so ago. Could it have intentionally been sealed up?
I got the impression from the paper that it was a natural phenomena, but I don't know that for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure they had a geologist there and it was a landslide or something. But you never know.
Yeah.
So let's talk stone circles. If that's the earliest one, there's got to be more, because the phenomenon of stone circles is so pervasive worldwide. And specifically, the largest number is in this area near France, England. This entire area of Europe has hundreds of known and probably hundreds of unknown stone circles, including megalithic ones. Here's Casterig stone circle. Those are some megaliths. We talked about Avebury Henge yesterday. Some of those stones are like 20 feet high and would have weighed 20 tons. Right. So 6,000 years ago, all over the world, everyone's moving 20-ton stones into circles. It doesn't add up. We really don't know anything about
anything.
The
only thing we know, I think we can infer, is that if all of these people are doing whatever work is required to move 20-ton stones, it must have been really important.
So what I was thinking, I had a kind of a revelation that some point after the Younger Dryas event, it was in the Levant there that they were in Gobekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe where they're preserving this information. But a few thousand years later, when civilization really kicks into gear around 6,000 years ago, the information of cosmic catastrophe and this cosmology is passed around the world. And so people, knowing this is the most important thing, all start to do this for their local community so that they can use it as a teaching mechanism, as almost like a shrine or their church, because they don't have, let's say, gods that we know of. Their cosmology is their religion. And this spread across the world, and everyone's doing it because everyone knows about it. And all these stone circles are similar but different in their own way because the people had different raw materials or different styles of building it.
Yeah. Well, and as we talked about in the show with Walter Cruttendam yesterday, there's almost a sense of, as we are descending in the Yuga cycle and becoming
Here we are.
less and less conscious and aware, it's like, yeah, so somewhere in the Treta Yuga, it's almost as if there's an understanding that we're going to forget all of this cosmology that is the original science. And so perhaps these are all being built to preserve that knowledge, you know, and as a teaching tool for the people living at that time that they can then pass to future generations, because we're going to get to a point where we're just not going to be aware of this information anymore unless it is specifically taught to us. So maybe that's the reason. And maybe it's maybe the Yuga cycle is so prominent in this respect that even without somebody telling us that we're going to forget, we just know that we're going to forget as civilizations, as the generations go by.
Well, and the Treta is a mental age. It's a much higher age. So that means, in my opinion, that's when you know. The truth is the golden age, but during the Treta, you still know, and you know you're going down. It's all going to be erased in a short period of time. It only takes a few thousand years to go from knowing everything to nothing.
Right.
It's crazy. What's interesting is the Egyptian timeline falls perfectly on the entire Dwarpa, the Dwapara, and which is the electrical age. And many people suggest that the Great Pyramid is an electrical generator, which would make sense based on the Yuga. Because the Great Pyramid of Cheops would have been constructed based on their dates during the Dwapara electrical Yuga.
Right.
And we're just getting back into that. I wonder if in let's say 1,000 years from now, we've got pyramids making electricity all over.
Right.
You never know.
Yeah.
So these stone circles are so pervasive in Europe. I'm just showing you some of the European ones, which these are mostly in the UK. The Dudo 5 stones, the Rollright stones of Oxfordshire, but they're all over the world. One place that I found was crazy. Where is that link? The stone circles of Senegambia. In Gambia, on the river Gambia, there are hundreds of stone circles, and these are intricately, each stone is carved. So this is like megalithic stuff.
And then there's also, aren't there stone circles all over South Africa?
Those are a different style and construction.
Yeah.
Michael Schellenberger claimed that they're 2 million years old or something with no
Was it
base.
Michael Tellinger?
Yeah, Tellinger.
Yeah.
Based on no evidence whatsoever. He just said they're 2 million years old.
Right.
But then he went off the cliff. He went off the deep end and started talking about giant footprints and mud fossils. And it was just, he just went insane.
It's unfortunate. Well, and then apparently there's stone circles all over Japan as well, which aren't nearly as old. Although some of them are. I haven't looked that deeply into that yet, but some of them would be in the Treta Yuga.
Yeah, the majority of the megalithic ones date very old, like Stonehenge, 3 to 6,000, at least 3 to 6,000 years earlier or before today.
I think it's pretty clear that the general trend is the older it is, the more likely it is to be megalithic.
Yeah, the Ring of Brogadar in Scotland. These megaliths date from 2500 BC to 2000, so 5,000 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Look at these, the Drombeg stones in Ireland. Like, what in the world? It almost looks like the procession panel on Combe Ridge.
Huh.
With all the little people and
Yeah.
strings.
Yeah. I wonder what this looks like in an aerial view.
Here we've got stone circles outside of Europe. This is the Rujum El Khiri stone circle in Israel. Almost looks like a maze,
labyrinth.
but you can't get through it.
Right. Yeah, that was my immediate impression. It looks like a labyrinth.
But it's not.
Maybe that's why in Europe they make round labyrinths.
Because of this.
Like maybe it's like a collective memory thing, so we just sort of automatically do that.
Then there's these deer stones of Mongolia. Have you heard of them?
No.
These are these huge megaliths with intricately carved petroglyphs all over them.
Huh.
And they're 3,000 years old. And there's stone spheres in Costa Rica that are unexplainable. Have you seen them? They're just perfectly round balls of granite.
Oh, I think I have seen those actually. Yeah.
So that is definitely coming from the same people like the Olmecs making the big round heads.
Exactly what I was going to say.
So that's some leftover stuff there.
Right.
Because they're dating after the Olmec heads to about 1700 years ago, 300 AD.
Hmm.
So it could have been leftover knowledge, and some guy just didn't want to make a big ball, so he made smaller round balls.
Right.
So if it is the Yuga cycle that's at work here, we're almost living in the worst time on Earth. We just 1,500 years ago was the worst time to be on Earth, in essence, where all of humanity was the dumbest they possibly could be.
Yep. Yep. The most unaware.
Which is funny because during the Dark Ages at this time, everyone on Earth was illiterate. And modern history claims it's because the rulers and the kings kept them that way. I'm starting not to believe that.
Right.
If hominid species have the brain capacity that we have right now for the last 500,000 years, that means we've been as smart or potentially as smart as we are right now. So something else is, you can't tell me that the entire population on Earth 1,500 years ago just wasn't interested in knowing what books said.
Right. Well, I mean,
but that's the narrative we are taught.
Right. I mean, the difference is it's what we're saying is that the intellectual capability of our brains has not changed, but something else has, right? It's like the conditions that allow us to absorb a certain amount of or receive a certain amount of information or certain kinds of information, those conditions have changed. And that's the part that we don't know about because we're still down in the Dwapara era, you know?
Right.
Like
but we do have some scientific information that may corroborate this idea. We all know, we were all taught decades ago that the humans, us, we are using just about 30% of our brain's capacity, and no one knows why.
I thought it was only like 10%.
I've heard 30.
Yeah, whatever.
But my point is, if we were to go back to 498 AD and do a study, I wonder if it was 10%.
Right.
And we're headed up to 100%, but we're nowhere near it. And so there is something controlling our greater consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Our greater consciousness is being controlled externally by a force. And we're not making this up. We discussed it on the show yesterday. The Greeks knew about it. The Hindus knew about it. It's where all of this information and this Hindu cosmology comes from. It comes from not the Hindus. It comes from someone prior to them that gave them the information.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the oldest Vedic texts are the oldest books on Earth. it had to come from something before that. You don't just all of a sudden wake up and all the information is lying on your desk.
Unless you're in the Satya Yuga, it would seem, right? Like it's so, I mean, that's really where it's coming from, right? At least with this idea that the Satya Yuga is the period of time where information is readily available to us. I get the impression without even trying, right? Like we've talked about the potential for telepathy being a normal thing during this age. And so all of the information is available. And as we descend in the cycle, there's some awareness that we're going to lose our ability to connect to that information. And so we start writing it down and encoding it in monuments so that there's at least some trace of this, some understanding of what this cycle is. Because as we're in the bottom of the cycle, we're not going to know what the cycle is anymore for the most part. I mean, but it's still here, right? Like this has persisted, this concept of the Yuga cycle. We have preserved something. So there's at least the potential for that awareness.
The burning of the library at Alexandria, right here, 50 BC.
I'm zoomed in. That's my problem. Yeah.
50 BC. So it's happening when it's supposed to happen. They're destroying the books because people don't care about books maybe at this point, or no one reads the books. No one can even understand the books. We're burning the books. We're starting over. It's almost like this is the wipe. This is the hard drive cleaning.
Part of the stupidity or the lack of awareness is part of that, perhaps, is that there is this idea by some that no one should have access to this information. It's just part of being stupid.
Yep.
That you have people that erase information that could be useful for humanity.
So it's like also this is the flexure point when we become evil. And we're still in that paradigm. Slavery was rampant. It was worldwide by 500 AD. Everyone was taking slaves. Millions of people murdered and tortured worldwide. Didn't matter what color your skin were. There were European slaves, African slaves, Chinese. Everyone was a slave. If you were weak, someone came to put you in a cage. You were going bye-bye.
Well, and in fact, if you read the Holy Science by the Swami Yukteswara, he even talks about that the darkest ages are also the periods where our virtue is at its absolute worst. Exactly what you're talking about.
This comes from Swami Yukteswara's, how do you say it?
Yukteswara, I think that's
Swami Yukteswara. This comes from his book.
His name is actually much longer than that, but I don't remember the rest of it.
Yogananda. So go get it. Now, the idea, and we discussed this with Cruttenden yesterday, and he was one of the first to jump on this decades ago, the concept of a binary, or the fact that it is the motion of our solar system through the Milky Way galaxy that moves us through bands of enlightenment.
Literally.
It's a sinusoidal cycle, and the longest part is when we're up in the center in the golden age. It lasts for 6,000 years, and then rapidly we digress. Wait a minute. Yeah, so 4,400. Where did I read that?
The Satya is 4,800 up and 4,800 down, and then the Treta would be 2,400 up and 2,400 down.
And then the Kali right here.
Yeah. Well, you're missing the Dwarapara.
What's good about it is for most of the Yuga cycle, we are enlightened for a very long period of time.
Yeah.
It's the transition to the bottom that's weird.
Yeah.
And then back up. But we are now in the backup. And so what I think is that we've got billions of humans on Earth, right? Not all human brains respond to whatever external energy that's controlling this in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
I think some people have higher capabilities than the average, and some have lower capabilities. Because we've had enlightened people in the Kali Yuga.
Yes.
So,
but surely they're not nearly as enlightened as the most enlightened people of the Satya Yuga, right?
No, those people apparently were glowing,
Right. I mean,
they could levitate. The whole idea of the flying carpet comes from this golden age.
Right. I mean, I love the very obvious parallel between actual light, electromagnetic energy, and enlightenment. I mean, it is not an accident that we use the same words to describe high awareness and light. So as Walter points out, there is the regular cycle of this on a daily basis, the being awake and aware during the day, and then being in a completely different state of consciousness, the darkness at night, right? It's the subconscious of the moon. And that we do the same thing seasonally. Things come alive at a certain part of year, and then they go dormant. And then on the grander scale, this is still happening. There's still this cycle of awakening and enlightenment and dormancy, and it's the light and the enlightenment is the same thing, which means that the information is in the electromagnetic energy. So if we become close to what we suspect is our binary star, we're just going to have more information readily available to us that we can just pull out of thin air.
Yeah.
That is intuition.
The best candidate, we talked about it in the show, was Barnard's star. And amazingly enough, we found out that the only information on when Barnard's was closest to us happened to coincide right here.
Yes.
Right at the top.
11,800 years ago.
Right. So that's the end of the Ice Age, which brings us into the quiet interstadial we're in now. And the next time it will be close is 11,000 years from now, when we're back at the same spot.
Mm-hmm.
That is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And the difference is 800 years, which would take us back here to the bottom of the Yuga, splitting it perfectly in half.
I had this interesting.
Crazy. That is so crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. A tiny Jupiter-like star, a brown dwarf, is in tandem with us in this dance, which affects our consciousness.
Well, and then I wonder too, we talked about the potential for an even larger cycle, maybe outside of the Great Year. And maybe that is an interplay with Sirius, which is much further away, right? And I mentioned that simply because the references to Sirius in ancient cultures are abundant. So obviously there's something very significant about that. So maybe there's another cycle of evolution and the cycle of consciousness in that. But also I was thinking,
maybe Sirius is controlling this.
Maybe.
Which would give it, that's the 100,000 year cycle. Mm-hmm. Problem with that is about 1.5 million years ago, it was more like a 40,000 year cycle. And just like I was saying on the show yesterday, the geologic evidence is that this cycle, the Great Year, has been happening time immemorial and hasn't changed much in length or duration. It's pretty much 26,000 years. We can't pin it down, but whatever that cycle is, it's been going on forever.
Yeah.
And the only thing that could do that is some type of perfect relationship in our galaxy that we can't comprehend as far as time scale. It's been going on for 1 billion years with our star, and it never changes, and we just haven't figured out what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
By the way, with let's say the enlightened people that show up in the Kali Yuga, I wonder if they are people, let's say, who lived in the Satya Yuga at some point and then chose to reincarnate in the Kali Yuga in order to bring some amount of awareness to people in the Kali Yuga. That would be an interesting idea.
Yeah, I wonder if anything miraculous happened around 500 AD. Noteworthy.
Or 0 AD?
Yeah. Yeah. So that we're now mixing religion in with the Hindu teachings here, and that would simply be probably correct, because the whole idea of an enlightened person would be a prophet. It's the same thing, or a sage, or they call them priest kings. Mm-hmm. The reason they added king after the priest was because the priest knew everything, and nobody had any idea why this guy knew everything. Mm-hmm. Because he reincarnated from the Satya into the Kali for the purpose of keeping at least some of it alive, keeping the dream alive.
Mm-hmm. And the priest or the pope, let's say in the tarot, is the Hierophant, right? It's the same idea, that this is the person who is the key and the guide who can translate the information to like the regular people.
Great show.
Find us tonight on Magnetic Reversal News at 8 p.m. Mountain Time on YouTube.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And we'll be right back after this message.